the director. He was an older man. He was getting ready to retire. And he just looked me in the eyes and he was like, look, you just need to find something you love doing. Cause I told him, I was like, I don't like dentistry and I don't even think I like surgery. He's like, the worst thing you could do is to do something you hate doing.
Mhm.
If and I so remember this conversation like it happened yesterday. He's like, if flipping cheeseburgers brings you joy and happiness, go do that. But then there were years where I didn't listen to that.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, he's right. I feel that like in my heart of hearts, but I'm not doing that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. I am delighted to have with us today Dr. Shane Fuller. He is a dentist and empowerment and transformation guide who has an incredible YouTube channel that will be linked down below. I highly recommend you check it out, where he shares many thoughts, lessons, and reflections from his own healing journey that have resonated deeply with me. So, with that being said, Shane, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
And for the people who have not yet had the honor to meet you, can you share a little bit more about yourself?
And where to begin? That's always the tricky part. Well, my channel is in this spirituality niche. And so I guess I could start with where my kind of started. And
Yeah.
although all of life is really spiritual, so the whole thing from start to finish is the journey. But I was thinking about it, and while I was in dental school, I I didn't want to go to dental school, which is interesting. It was sort of the path of least resistance. I wanted to be a physician, and then at some point I was in a fraternity, and I don't know if I got sidetracked. I doubted myself if I could really get into medical school. And so I thought, well, I'll go into dentistry. And I really didn't explore it very much. I'm like 21 making a decision, a big
Mhm.
life decision. And so I got there, I got to dental school, I got in, I went to school in New York, and I immediately knew like, oh, this is not what I want to do at all. But I at that point I wasn't gonna just drop out and start all over. So in just I bring that up to say the stress of being in school and being in this path that didn't feel right, and thinking I was simultaneously not good enough to be a dentist. I didn't feel I had the hand skills for it, and I wasn't interested in it. But then also like I felt like I was too good for it at the same time, and I should be in the medical school.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
So
I want to pause on that too, because this has been
sure.
an interesting construct, right? In the hierarchy of even in dental school, something the shared thoughts I had, well, I'll pursue oral surgery. And I think we talked about that was like, oh, because then I'll be as worthy, at least, right? Get the MD, I'll be as worthy and I'll belong to, and I'll show that I'm capable. But even this hierarchy, like dental school's gotten really, really, challenging to get into. And I'm not sure how people competing now, dental versus medical school, to get into. And I think depending on people's strengths, like dental school could be harder than med school because of the lab component, or, just depending on what people's strengths are. But even observing in medicine is there's a hierarchy. Okay, well, if you do medicine, then you're not enough until you do this part of medicine. And if you're in primary care, you're in a lower paying specialty. So it's like this construct in our mind. And I'm wondering what's resonating or what's not for you is just, well, I'm too good for dentistry. Well, what is,
Yeah.
our, I met some amazing dentists. I'm like, dude, that works is amazing. And I don't think that they're less than anymore, when it
So
comes.
true. This is, yeah, all coming from the ego. And the interesting thing, I had that same thought too. It was like, well, I'm going to go to dental school. I'll become an oral surgeon. That'll be my back door into medicine because I'll do a 6-year program, get my medical license, and I'll be a surgeon and an MD at the same time and a dentist. So that was my like rationale for a rationalization for going through dental school. The ironic part is like I almost failed. I almost had to repeat a year. Like I was on
Mm.
the verge because I failed this fixed prosthodontics class, which is like was the hardest laboratory class you probably know.
Yeah, I recall. I
And
still remember who
I
taught
had
me.
to do this. Yeah, me too. um, and I had to do this summer remediation, and it all came down to like this one test. Like if you don't pass this test, it was a lab test, hands-on, where you're gonna have to repeat a year. That was like that's the I don't think I can do that. I'm gonna just have to like just jump out of a building or
Mhm, mhm.
whatever, quit school. So, but that didn't happen. I made it through, and I just think that it's so important to follow like your heart because these things you like, yeah, like I categorized, oh, dental school is easier and lower on the hierarchy, but maybe if it's not right for me, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep, that resonates. Mhm,
I think of Jim Carrey.
mhm,
I don't know if you've heard this, but he
mhm.
talks about his father a lot, how his father failed at something that he hated doing. And so Jim Carrey always says, well, you should at least go for what you really want to do because you might fail at something you don't want to do.
Mm,
And I think it's probably more likely if you're not there's all that resistance, like
mhm.
going against the grain and doing what's natural. There's probably a reason for it. So
Yeah, and even if you're outwardly successful, it's the internal suffering that comes with trying to be successful in something you're not enjoying. And I also question, looking back at my experience, was did I not enjoy dentistry, or I didn't like what my mind was like at the time, which was hyper fixated on perfectionism and not my own best friend, right? So I'm I I'm wondering, with the self growth, could dental school experience been different in a way that you would have enjoyed it more, or would given yourself permission to exit sooner? What would it look like if you were to start today?
well, I think about that now that I've left dentistry
Hmm.
and have had more time to grow and evolve. What would it be like going back? Would it bother me as much as it did before? Because how much of this is just an internal issue?
Mm,
Now, it may be actually mismatched for like my natural abilities,
yeah.
but it's a great question. And so, yeah, in dental school, I was like drinking a lot and not on my side for the most part.
Yeah. My coping skill was anorexia, and I felt if I didn't have that, I would have relied on, there was a lot of drinking going on to get through dental school. And at what capacity is that showing us that we're living out of alignment? Or again, it's just the stress of the experience, which it is challenging to tease apart. And I'm curious, I know it's a current investigation that you just offered was exploring what dentistry means now to Shane. And do you want to or not, right? Not forcing yourself to do it because you can, but exploring is what parts of this might be true to me, or what do I need in order to verify that I'm ready to walk away from this?
I don't know. Yeah,
I feel I'm on the same
it's yeah.
wavelength. I'm asking myself the same question. It's I interjected some of my comments. I was like, "Oh, I'm projecting on you my own internal dialogue, and I don't want to do that." But just that shared internal questioning. Just wanted to offer that I'm also on that journey as I get nervous
Yeah. Well,
anytime. Mhm.
what comes up for me is there karma still there?
What do you mean by that?
So, well, I mean, there's this trajectory and it needs to play itself out. And until it's over, it's not over.
Mm.
Am I still thinking about it? Is there still like a poll? Maybe it's not done yet. I've been reflecting on that. I think I'm almost there, but there still may be some unfinished business. That's a whole nother topic.
I would love to talk about that as we're both walking into
And
exploring.
I will say, yeah, on the idea of karma, especially like paternal karma, my growing up, my dad didn't like what he did. He didn't finish school. So he worked in construction. He worked really hard and like out in the sun. And I think I had a resentment toward him because he didn't like what he did. I felt like he didn't have the energy and the time. He worked long hours for me. And I swore, I was like, I'm not going to be like him. I'm going to do it differently.
Mm,
And I ended up finding myself in the exact same situation where I'm now in this career. I feel stuck and it doesn't inspire me creatively and I hate it. And it's a whole thing about like forgiveness too, because it's like, well, if I have this resentment toward him, is that keeping me stuck in these kind of situations?
mm,
And the YouTube channel, it's like I've met resistance with my family because I've mentioned them. I talk about family dynamics, and they have not. They've just not liked it. And I brought up this pain of. See, the thing is, dentistry didn't feel like it really tapped into my creative like inspirations. And this is getting kind of personal here, but I don't think my dad felt he was supported to do that in his life. And my judgment or my guess is that it was difficult for him to like allow that then in me.
mm,
And he had some unresolved pain and anger around that. And so there's this like this been this back and forth resentment and this me trying to find that freedom to do that, to find something that's creatively fulfilling and inspiring. Dentistry has been great. I'm grateful for it. It gave me freedom to do a lot of things and open doors for me. And so I can be grateful. Like my parents really push me, or I internalize like I've got to, I became a high achiever. We could go, that's a whole nother topic, but I'm grateful for that they supported me in that. But it was that piece that was missing of like the creative, doing something that really is creatively fulfilling and sharing myself in an authentic way.
mm.
So the question to bring it back is like, does this whole career we find ourselves in, is there like there's a whole like karma behind it that's bigger than me. It involves other people and forces.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
It made a lot of sense.
I think in doing the YouTube channel now, feeling freer with it, and working through some of these issues of like not needing my parents' support and resolving these resentments I've had, does that then free me up to release this karma that I've had, this old karma around like being in dentistry and doing this like career that's financially, it's safe. It's a traditional career, but it doesn't like inspire me, it doesn't light me up. Can that then now be released because I've developed enough in this other area and like spiritually?
Hmm.
And that's where I think like spiritual growth is like so invaluable and just like exploring consciousness as well too. Because so I don't get stuck in these like
Mhm.
these tunnels with tunnel vision,
Yeah,
repeating the same thing over and over and over again.
I appreciated that thought. I was observing too is when I let go of the attachment of my worthiness to dentistry, it feels less threatening to try it again. And I'm oral medicine, so the things I'd be interested in doing are the things like the extractions, the things that I learned in oral surgery. Like those are the ones that I stopped doing the general dentistry shortly after dental school. And so I'm like, well, what skills do I still have? And if I were to practice, which procedures would I want to focus on? And when I went to investigate that, I went to a dental school here to be an adjunct, and they said, we want you to do whatever brings you joy that you would find fulfilling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out. I like had, I had been trying to figure out where can I be most valuable? What can I offer? And they're going to, potentially can pull you into multiple different ways. It's figuring out where you want to be. And I was like, wow, that question, to offer it to myself, I could tell I hadn't offered it to myself like that before.
Wow. That's so, I mean, that brought up so much for me right now, by the way. Oral medicine, well, that's so cool. I actually almost went into oral pathology. I don't know, we can get into
Hmm.
that too. But when you said, yeah, that who was it that asked you what brings you joy? The
It was
faculty?
one of the people helping with my onboarding
Yeah,
process that was facilitating.
so huge. Those questions can be life-changing.
Mhm.
And one sticks in my mind after I graduated dental school. And I also want to get back to this like idea of paternal karma because I signed up for the military, for the Navy. Yeah, right. Pressured, not to blame parents at all. They're
Yeah.
well-meaning, but that's like financial money traumas of like, how are you going to pay for this? Like, well, I don't, private loans. But something did attract, I was like attracted to it, the idea of being an officer and serving. And in my family line, my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a Navy officer. And so I just was, I just went along with the nudge of like, hey, this looks like a great opportunity. They'll pay for all your schooling, which it totally is. And but something in me felt like, well, I'm really getting over my head. I'm in dental school, the hell, and now I'm like signing this huge contract. And I hope I don't veer off course here, but
There is no
so
course. There is no
yeah,
course.
I'll bring it all back to that question of what brings you joy. But
Yeah.
a whole story I had with my dad was that, this was like him living vicariously through me. And it was like me, like, oh, I'm gonna like make the family happy, the people pleasing. I'm gonna, save the family. Look at me. I'm my grandma, everybody will be so proud. And so, I was getting something from it for sure. And
Mhm.
not to mention just the financial assistance. But I had this alcohol addiction. I started seeing a psychiatrist in school, went on some medication for the first time just to try it. And then I told the Navy, like the last second as I was getting ready to graduate, and they said, like, oh, we wish you wouldn't have told us that. Like, this
Mm.
is a big deal now. Like, we need all your medical records. Fax those over immediately. So I go to the psychiatrist. She has all my medical records, but they're very detailed. And other activities I had been involved in. And so all that to say that once I sent those over, I then needed a medical waiver to stay in. So I had plans to go to officer school, officer development school, which is like the first stage of being in the Navy on active duty after school. And that all got, and I was in a residency too. I forgot a GPR. It's a general practice residency for dentists in San Diego. So I had all these plans. They all fell through. And I was like, you're on hold until you get this waiver. I did not get the waiver and I was released. And I found myself, all my classmates were like working, but and I had failed my dental license test. And so I had to, this goes back to the hand skills and working on, I was really good academically and when it came to like tests on paper, but when it came to tests on people or a mannequin, no way. So I had to I landed and I was back in California trying to find patients on my own to take this test, the licensing exam, and I was working as a dental assistant. And I was sober. It was a really like this was now I was like, oh, I'm an adult. You know, school can shelter us
Mm,
so much. Like I'm like, oh, I'm freaking this is like rough now. This is reality, like setting in. So I somehow managed to do all that because I was like staying sober and I was going to meetings. I met people who were in dentistry and people helped me. But the big feature was I managed to get into an internship, an oral surgery internship. And then I was like, oh my God, my prayers have been answered.
mhm.
I'm going to get out of this mess that I found myself in and get my life back on track and rise up and be this like shining star that I know myself to be. But it was a lot of it was ego.
Mhm.
Like I was just chasing that like big title and profession and
Yep.
respect, really.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, this is the nod
So
of understanding. Yep. Mhm.
yeah, no, we've talked a little bit, so I know you know. But I got to the internship and I didn't last very long because I mean I was still like on and off drinking, hadn't really gotten like permanently sober yet. And so that was, and I was just insecure. I was in this, you know how residencies are, like I
Yep.
just was, I don't know, too sensitive for it or whatever. And I just was like, I'm not gonna, this isn't worth it. I'm not gonna stick it out. I was butting heads with like the chief resident, and I had a conversation with the director. He was an older man who was getting ready to retire, and he just looked me in the eyes and he was like, to your question, like, look, you just need to find something you love doing. Because I told him, I was like, I don't like dentistry and I don't even think I like surgery. He's like, the worst thing you could do is to do something you hate doing.
Mhm.
He's like, if and I so remember this conversation like it happened yesterday. He's like, if flipping cheeseburgers brings you joy and happiness, go do that. He's like, but then there were years where I didn't listen to that.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, he's right. I feel that like in my heart of hearts, but I'm not doing that because reality, right? Like I have um loans and like I've got to figure it out. So I have to survive. But yeah, that just reminded me of even when you said what brings you joy. Um, I was reminded of that.
Mhm. And how to measure that question when you're entering back into the dental field, right? Is even if aspects of our career, not everyone, it's a kind of feels like a privileged place to devote everything you're working on to being something you enjoy. But what I hear, how people can leverage aspects of their profession is okay, well, the means to an end, like this role of doing dentistry for this part is to provide me stability so I can put my energy into this. And it can have a role for some people. It doesn't mean I have to love every aspect of being XYZ clinician, but I love aspects of dentistry. I love the patients, right? I like to know the patient's stories and the 3-hour dental appointments we had in dental school that they could actually tell us. And like what aspects of your current values could be represented in being a dentist, and how could that role support you in your other platforms and your other work while you investigate, like, is it taking up too much space? Is it costing me more than it's providing me? Those are the questions I'm asking myself, so I'm just kind of processing them out loud to share with you
Yeah,
your
they're all great
experience.
questions. And it's like, for me, it's always been I resist most titles and labels, but being a healer, like the healing aspect, working in direct patient care, I enjoy that. I think I have like I help people like be at ease that are in uncomfortable situations, which is naturally what we have to do as dentists.
Yeah.
So I do enjoy that. I enjoy just I kind of like the performance of it too, when everything flows really well and the patient's like, oh wow, we're done. Like when it's like, yep, I got you in and out, and everything just was like I like that. But I had this, to go back to the story, I guess pattern of, oh, there's something I want to do, but no, I'm going to choose that safe route that makes sense,
Mm,
that's financially, like, usually I would put money first. So for instance, the Navy took about like 5 years to get back to me. This played out really slowly over time, as you know how slow the military is with everything. Finally, they came back to me and they said, look, we just opened this up. You can either start paying us back the money you owe. I owed them a lot of money.
mhm,
And it was a good low interest rate. So I was like, okay, that's fair. Or we have this new thing where you can come work for us as a civilian and just work your time off that way. And right at that time, I had actually, I was getting sober now again, but this time for the last. And I had applied, I'd gotten into I was really interested in oral pathology, and I'd gotten into an oral pathology residency. And I was like, am I really going to do this? Like, I was living in California. I'm going to go back to New York, where I went to dental school, and start this program. And I'd always been interested in it. And then, but the Navy came knocking at the same time. And I was like, nope, they made me an offer I can't refuse. So I'm taking the money again. And then I'm in this comfortable position within the Navy that's, yet I'm kind of rotting inside. I'm just comfortably numb, like on autopilot, because it's not like there was just not really opportunities to grow, and especially as a civilian. So
yeah,
it was a weird place, and of not really belonging either, because I'm like, I'm not in the Navy,
yep,
but I'm working for them.
yep. A lot of contractors feel that way.
Yeah, so it was
Mhm,
an interesting dynamic. Well, so while I was rotting, I was, you know, I wasn't drinking, and so that was a part of my journey of now taking away these substances. I'm not numbing as much, and I'm more sensitive
yeah,
to myself and environment. And I found myself in this other 12-step program. Started off in Alcoholics Anonymous, then adult children of alcoholics, and started to go into my childhood and work through, child trauma and family dysfunction, and really do that, start that inner child healing work. That opened up so much for me
yeah,
as far as like the spiritual healing and journey goes. And then I just, I sense like, I think I'm going to quit the Navy. I was on a contract with them. I was like, just counting down the months, like, am I going to make it to the end of this contract? And then I went through, I was having issues with my family. We weren't really talking, and that was painful. And I'm doing this work, this like childhood trauma work all at the same time, perfect timing, of course. And a relationship fell apart, a romantic relationship. And then for some reason that one got me, and it was just like, I was more attached to that, or because of the not having like substances, and
yeah,
this work I'd been doing more sensitive, like this like abandonment wound came up, and like I was like a wall of pain. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know what to do about this. This is like got me this time around. Like
yeah.
this just not moving. And so I found this person on YouTube, and he was talking. We know him as,
Yep.
Victor Odo. And I was immediately, I was like inspired by what he was sharing. And he mentioned that he ran retreats in Costa Rica, and I wasn't sure, because like, oh, I'm a dentist and I'm also sober. How does that fit in? Will that, am I more likely to relapse? I was very like concerned with what other people would think of me too, if they judge me as like, oh, he's not really sober because he did
Yeah.
some plant medicine.
Mm,
I was on the fence, but because of this like pain I was feeling, it just felt like the right call for me. And I just allowed myself, like, I'm gonna go down there and just see what it's about. So I went, sat in ceremony, did ayahuasca, and it was like the first time I was like, I mean, I feel just unconditional love. Not for anything that I'm doing or achieving, but just for being. here on this like planet in this moment. And it was so intoxicating too to my inner child, not just the medicine, but being in this container with people and feeling so seen and appreciated just for like my heart, just for existing. And I was like, it was almost a blessing and a curse because I came back. I was like, what the hell am I doing? I've been asleep this whole time, and like nothing is now good enough. And they say like don't make any major decisions for 6 months, but I didn't wait, and I ended up quitting. I just was like, this is so crazy. I had every thought going like, this is totally irresponsible. Do not do this. Doesn't make sense financially. Finish out your contract. And in hindsight, yeah, I probably could have waited, but I just went for it, and I've just been on this journey since of like following, my heart and trying things, like experimenting, having this channel where I'm sharing, well, like my breakthroughs and just what I feel inspired to talk about. Hopefully it'll inspire somebody else. And then working on building a coaching business and maybe doing some dentistry on the side, just being flexible and flowing with life. So that's kind of it.
Oh, I am strongly appreciative that you're sharing your healing journey on your YouTube channel and kind of living out loud because it allowed me to find you. And I feel from the depths of my core how important your messages are. So I appreciate you being here so we can share them in
Thank you.
real time, right? As we're
Great.
working through them together out loud. Not to say we have all the answers, but to hear people, especially when they may not be aware they're abandoning themselves, or they may feel emptiness when they realize I've abandoned myself. Now what? Or am I the only one that feels this way? Right? You give people the opportunity to be
Right.
like, you're not alone. And I'm here to support you as you're learning how to support yourself.
Thank you. And I appreciate you so much, what you're doing, being yourself, has allowed us to connect. And imagine if you hadn't done that. It's like, I think if everyone just, it's having that courage to be disliked, and I know it's not easy, but like put yourself out there, then you can find the people you're really meant to attract, that you vibe with. And so
Yeah.
you don't keep feeling abandoned or
Yeah.
abandoning yourself. Anyway,
Yeah. And
yeah,
and to the last point of that, it wasn't until I learned how to give myself love and to be there for myself that I could embrace hearing other people's opinions of me and not take it personally. And if it brings up that self-hate wound, I observe. But if people think that they hate me, they barely know me. If people think they hate you, they barely know you. They have this perception of who you are,
right,
or whatever you represent to them is bringing something up inside.
totally. The YouTube channel has helped me so much with that. It's through comments.
Yeah.
I was really afraid in the beginning of getting negative comments, and now I
Yeah.
just see it as like, oh, that is 90% of the time I go, okay, that person's in pain. They've been triggered and they're projecting onto me. Same thing with the positive stuff. So it's like, how much do I take that in?
Yeah.
Sometimes I see it as constructive criticism, but most of the time I just let it go and go, that's about them. So, and the positive stuff, I appreciate it in the moment. I feel grateful, but like it's not getting attached to it because it's always just about what that person is experiencing.
So, we got connected through my understanding of your background, but also I resonated more with you because of your daily spiritual videos. So it's like
Yeah.
we have a shared professional title, but like I'm not attached to it. It doesn't sound like you're attached to it. And I kept
No,
playing with removing my titles. When this channel started, I originally wasn't going to tell about people's backgrounds or use titles. And then it just was really hard for me to introduce them without that because it's such a part of our journey. I was like, okay, so I'm not going to make that, I'm not going to control it, right? I'm going to ask people how they identify, how they like to be introduced, what's meaningful for
yeah.
them. And it was at a time where I was actually having like, don't call me a dentist, right? I was having some trauma response to that. And I had to ask, like, what does that even mean? Right. So you did earn your title of doctor. That's something you can always carry with you no matter what you decide to do with dentistry.
Yeah, definitely. I've softened around that as well. And I
Hmm.
had like a wall up after I left. Like, I am never going back. I'm done. I'm not a dentist. I'm never going to work as a dentist again. And it became just this area of resistance. And I saw how that was limiting me
Mm.
and kind of making what I want to do and what I'm working toward more difficult to achieve, whatever the word is. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's an equally valid path.
Hmm.
What is my deal? Why am I so anti? And it's funny because now I may actually take some part-time work, like
Hmm.
just on the side. And there's a part of me that's kind of excited just to do a working interview. It's been
Hmm.
so long, and I don't know, just test it out. But it feels like that there's less pressure than on the coaching and creating content. And it's not this like desperate, I need this to work out. I know we've both
Yeah.
an FTP, so
Hmm.
this is like a common theme that comes up, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think the energy of when people come at it in a place of desperation, it repels, right? I need
yeah.
this to work out. Well, what does that mean? Something that I've shifted in social media content was I like to just share something I find meaningful. And the outcome is me sharing something I find meaningful or having these wonderful conversations with people who I'm like, your content is profound. The things that you're working through, the help self-healing journey that you've been on and how you help partner with others, like your individual personal mission based off of your life experience. Like dentistry is part of it, right? It wasn't your whole life. And how you bring that into your work to partner with people. I'm like, that's so fascinating. Having this conversation and getting to know you, like that's the most meaningful aspect of my outcome. Having the opportunity to share it with people who I know will find value and need to hear your voice, your message, and meet you, like that's the gift I give. And whether or not they choose to receive it, I can't control that. And
Mhm.
if we change the meaning of social media, I think it can help our relationship with it. And you do a whole lot of social media, so I'd love your insights as you've been navigating it.
Yeah. Wow, it's been such a journey. I don't mean this, yeah, that's so much to unpack. The first thing that comes to my mind is I was really wrapped up, and my parents got so caught up into this. I've like your family, I think, comes along for the ride, whether you want them to or not. And so I realized a lot of it was me actually trying to prove them wrong,
Mm.
which I don't
Mhm.
think is the best motivation. And at some point that shifted. I don't know when, but I think when I realized it, like, oh, that's not the intention I really want.
Yeah. And tell me about the shift. Like, how were you when that was your motivation, and how are you today?
There was an unmet need of like, oh, I really want their support. I want them to come along for this journey. And then like
Yeah.
letting that go and finding the gift was just like, oh no, I'm gonna support myself and not need their support.
Mm.
And I realized I was doing almost what they were doing. Like I thought, oh, they're trying to control me and shut this down and stop it. But look how much I saw how much I was trying to control them.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
like, no, you need to see it my way. You need
Yeah.
to be on board and be supportive of me. But it's like, no, they can dislike it if they like to.
Mhm.
And I have no control over that.
It's so fascinating. It's really
Yeah.
insightful for you to observe that. And even just thinking when we try to control others, not only is it frustrating on us, but typically other humans don't like to be told what to do, how to think, right? So there's going to be often resistance. There's this book called Humble Inquiry, The Gentle Art of Asking Instead of Telling. Have you heard of that book?
No, I have not.
It's a small book, and I often bring it up whenever anyone said like just wanting people to act a certain way or their reaction to being told what to do. She's like, this human nature to not like to be told what to do, like to have our own agency is more empowering. And so, it's, I don't know if one of my parents has ever watched any of my videos. One of my parents watches quite a few, has some comments, and is supportive of most, but will share if she doesn't like some. And good information, right? It's information. But that need, like that deep craving, that need, when, this relationship that you have with your parents, it's like such a unique relationship that's not with other people, like you're biologically related. And so it brings up like that, what value is there? And what you said was, what's the unmet need?
Yeah. It's a good question. Really good question. A need for appreciation is one. I think there are a lot of people on social media doing that. They're like, they are deeply searching for their tribe to be appreciated and be seen and to be heard. There's just not been enough of that. And I often wonder, like, how much of me is seeking that out.
Hmm. Yeah. And our own internal dialogue can really play into whether or not we actually obtain that acceptance, and or if we self-sabotage, right? Like you said, you became the controller. And what I noticed in my life when I was trying to do something in order to gain other people's approval, I would get so nervous. I would become very controlling of the situation. An example is that I hosted an event in February of this year. It was a event, and I was hosting the author. So the moment the author of the book said she would come for this book club event, I started to get even more controlling, like a hostzilla. It's like, who's interested in coming? What days and times are you available? Only answer if you're committed to coming, which that last thing was like, oh, that sounds awful coming out of my mouth. But I was just trying to make sure that there was going to be a presence, that people were going to be there, so that the guest wasn't like, well, you're a complete flop. No one likes you. See, no one came to your event. I just wasted the hour, right? All those thoughts were coming into my head. And I didn't like how it made me show up. Can you relate to that if you ever hosted an event, or and maybe even, meeting one of your clients for the first time?
Yeah, I think I put a lot of pressure on myself and I give things more importance than is necessary. And then it's like I'm always getting in my way
Mhm.
when I do that. I stop being so natural
Yeah.
and get kind of, I can feel myself getting kind of tight right now. Like, ooh, this is an important interview.
Hmm. Isn't it interesting though, right? Because I said the moment I pushed the
Yeah.
record button, it was nice
And
to,
I noticed that felt a little more relaxed. And then it's like, as soon as you press record, it's like, well, the answers need to be a little bit more polished. And
it
yeah,
feels like that, right? But like if we just strip that away, now that we're aware, right? Now that we're aware, we pretend I never pushed the record button. We can see how it differs. I think it is that, because in The First Rule of Mastery, it's a book by Michael Gervais. It's called The First Rule of Mastery: Stop worrying about what other people think of you. He describes this fear of other people's opinions loop. And the fear of other people's opinions is not actually like, if you were to tell me what you thought of me, that's information, I'll receive it. But it's what I think you're thinking of me. So like you're gonna think I'm an awful host because I just became more performative the moment we put the record button on. I'm still authentic, but now we're nervous about if my words are gonna come out all jumbly, or if I'm gonna forget the
yeah,
English language, right? So I'm worried about that, right? Which would distract from me being present with you. So I'm having this, the FOPO loop starts with anticipation. So before we jumped on, I'm going to think, gosh, Shane's going to think he wasted his time with me. I was an awful host. He's never going to want to do this again, right? I can think about that, about how I could do better, make this a meaningful experience. And I'm worried. And then the next one is checking. So I'm checking to see, are you having a good time? Do I suck as a host? Right? I'm trying to gain your verbal cues. You're being very honest with me and open. And I trust that if I were to ask you, you would give me a response that's true now, or if you reflect later, you might, it might take a day or two for you to give me feedback after you've absorbed, depending on, people's processing and the time they like to spend on it. And then I would respond in a way that's, if I don't think you're having fun, I might change how I show up, and that's less authentic, in order to help you have a better time, because I think you're having a lousy time and you are regretting showing up today. That's exhausting.
Yeah, that was well said. I think a lot of things, my brain's just like firing off on the different uh, checking, like that just creates more anxiety and more attachment. I think like the issue is just comes down to attachment.
Mhm.
I was thinking about this today. It's more of like a spiritual solution, or like it's bringing more presence to bear. Is I've been a people pleaser for a long time, and the
Yeah.
more like awareness I have with it, it's almost like it's worked against me. If I didn't have a spiritual practice, every time I see it, like I can use that to flog myself
Mm.
and or ruminate on all the ways. Oh, see there, I did it again. I'm people pleasing.
And how can we shift that? Like, once you're aware of it, because it
Yeah.
sounds like you were shifting from our conversations before. I think we pushed the record as we were talking about judging, right? And it sounds like that people pleaser, we could come at it like, oh, I'm doing it again. Look, I'm people pleasing again. Or we can say, oh, look at that. I'm people pleasing again. I wonder what that's about.
Yeah. That's, I guess, like the compassionate self-inquiry.
Yeah.
And I think it's just getting to like using suffering as a teacher, like getting to a place where like I've had to get to a place where I'm still working on it, but where I get to enough suffering that I finally detach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You just answered kind of the question I was having. What meaning would it provide? How would it change your life if you were able to detach from these outcomes?
It allows you to be more in the moment and more present, and then experience like more joy, more peace, more the natural state of living, of being.
Mm-hmm.
Like attachment is all going on in the mind. It's all, I'm attached to an outcome, which is a mental formation, or I'm attached to a person, but it's really the idea of them, or it's the image of them, or it's all these thoughts, which you said, like I'm attached to what is Shane, is he enjoying this interview?
Mm-hmm. And
It's
even
all
if you
just
didn't,
thinking.
right? Like, even if you were to tell
Yeah.
me like that interview was like not fun at all, like, right? Okay, thank you. What could I have done for the interview to be a better experience for you? Right? It's like in that meaning making, I could ask Shane, well, how could I have shown up for a better host? How could have this been more enjoyable? A better use of your time? You could give me your
Mhm.
feedback. Or I could say, oh my gosh, Shane hates me. I'm so worthless. I did a horrible job hosting. It means that I don't matter to the world, right? We can cascade it, or we can just stay, oh, I'm curious how I could have made that a better experience for you.
Right. Yeah, I guess one is like what I hear you saying is you're the neutral observer, and you're just being objective. What can I
Mm-hmm.
learn from it? And versus like reinforcing the story your
Yeah.
mind is creating or whatever.
And how it sounds so easy, like, oh my gosh, yeah, that just sounds like life would just be full of so much less suffering if we just immediately went the ways that I was reframing it, right? But often our natural reaction is the catastrophic. At least it is for me. For the
Yeah.
attachment to have come up for you, I'd love to hear how that became such an important topic for you to focus on.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's the continually ruminating on it after it already happened, instead of just going, okay, let me set that down, new moment. Yes, I'm disappointed, whatever, but here's a new moment. It's come up for me a lot this past week or so. I've noticed too, people on YouTube that I follow, attachment seems to be a theme right now. That's, or at least in my world, the people I follow all seem to be talking about it. It's really interesting. So I don't know if it's just coming up in the collective. Uh, Last week it was my girlfriend's birthday, And I'm not intending to, I somehow turned this thing into like a big deal. And I got very attached to like, she needs to have a good time. And I just ended up overdoing it in every way possible. And then after it was all said and done, I I was just drained and I was angry at myself because I
Mm,
had abandoned myself.
mm,
And I saw underneath that was, oh, it's coming from my fear of abandonment. I don't want to be abandoned.
mm.
So I'll people please, but then I end up abandoning myself. And I think underneath people pleasing, or at least for me, it was just this need or want to feel worthy and feel valuable.
So you noticed you abandoned yourself. What would have the day been like if you didn't abandon yourself?
Maybe more authentic.
Walk me through that. What would the day have looked like?
Yeah. I don't know if it would have been all that different. Maybe less just internally, less pressure,
Wow,
not signing up for so much,
that
being
was so
more
profound.
honest.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
mind blowing. Your response there. Sorry, I didn't mean to intercept your words, but you just captured maybe it wouldn't have looked different outwardly, but it would have felt and looked different inwardly.
Yeah.
It was a very profound answer, not the one I expected. I didn't know what to expect actually, but that's very relatable and I appreciate you saying it.
Yeah. Well, you kind of led me that into it. Hadn't really thought about it until
Mm.
you asked me that question. So I'm gonna take a sip of tea.
What kind of tea you got there? Is it life
It's
changing?
a turmeric cinnamon moringa.
Oh, it does
On
sound
my
life
counter.
changing. Nice.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Are you drinking anything?
I am not. I have water, I think. My
Yeah.
water says, what would Brene Brown do? Because I was leveraging the work of Brene Brown for a very long time before I moved to Houston, where I had the opportunity to
Mm.
hear her speak. And it was really hearing her talking about courage and vulnerability that shifted my life. And then kind of more into the spiritual development now. And I find I'm always up here too much, which I think is why, we came together and I was, wow, like what you're working on really resonates and how we get stuck in our head really resonates. And our immediate reaction to a profession that's been part of our life that seems like, why do you have such a profound reaction to dentistry, right? And to investigate what does that mean? How much of it do you actually want to keep in your life? What aspects do we let go because it no longer serves us? And also
Yeah.
identifying what aspects of dentistry that we think we don't like are because it's bringing up something underneath that's painful.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That brings up a lot. I think it really ties into this whole conversation of people pleasing topic in dentistry. Um, I did it. I think the reason I had such a profound reaction is it was inauthentic. And I saw that like it was coming from my need to people please and stepping into like leaving that, giving myself permission to leave and then start something else.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channel and the coaching is my way of inviting more authenticity into my life. And which is why I brought up the birthday um, week with my girlfriend because it's like when I'm people pleasing, I'm not being authentic.
Yeah. And your relationship with dentistry, I know this evolved for me, so I'm curious how it has evolved for you, or just like if we think about relationships in general, right? Maybe we got into relationships, we did something for a reason at some point where it felt very inauthentic. And I'm wondering if your relationship with dentistry has changed such at this time you can find ways that you can do dentistry in some capacity that does align with your authentic self.
Yeah, I haven't really explored like other environments that could be better for me and would feel more authentic, but having these other things going on that I'm working on, I feel freer. It's not like, oh, dentistry, it has to work with dentistry. I have to find that within dentistry. So it takes a lot of the pressure off.
Yeah, that's an important lesson for people who are really in burnout, that everything is really consumed to one thing and often not
Mhm.
allowing ourselves to have something on the side that we have more agency, brings in more creativity, less potentially
Yeah.
less stress from other people, right? Maybe stress that we have more control over.
I think that's where we're shifting, like collectively, as people are this whole like 40-hour work week when you go into an office is like insane. More and more people are working on at home and have other side gigs and just flowing from one thing to the next.
Before I took a fully remote job, I was 100% clinical. And I had a lot of self judgment when I went fully remote. And then I realized, wow, like people have jobs their whole lives where they can do them online if they want to. I don't perceive them as less than. I don't actually know these people very much, right? Like I don't know what they do all day. I don't know who works in an office, who works in a clinic, who works in an OR. Like I can't tell you. And like, why do I think other people are judging me unless I tell them I work remotely? And then they might be intrigued, ask, how could I work more remotely? They might judge me if their self worth is dependent on their clinical or OR hours, right? So, but however they're going to judge me and give me feedback is going to be based off of their internal biases, their life experiences, their beliefs, and like whatever I've got going inside is just helping me to mirror within my own self. Like, what am I still clutching on to that is something I'd like to let go of? A lot of it is that self worth and needing to be worthy from a measurement that's often provided by the medical system. She's like RVUs, clinical hours, and OR would be great because that's like higher RVU if you're doing surgeries, right?
Yeah. Do you feel like is it about other people's judgment or is it really self-judgment
I think
at the end of
the
the day?
the pain itself, I think the pain is self-inflicted, right?
Yeah.
Because if I have insecurities, which I do, all of us have insecurity of some sort, unless you're like really delusional, sociopath, and very, very narcissistic, which I've heard are very insecure as well. So no titles, but I anticipate most people have insecurities, right? I think.
No,
Uh,
not me. I'm
not
kidding.
you, except for Shane, who that's why he's here to tell us how to do that. But I'm just thinking when I notice something is like activating me inside and I'm feeling like grief, heartache, really bad about myself, it's because whatever happened really showed me where my insecurities are and the meaning I make from, when I get a text from someone or I perceive a lot of people have these hierarchies in medicine and in dentistry about who's more worthy than who. And uh, I kind of have this sense of non-belonging because I like kind of did dentistry and I like kind of did medicine and I didn't do it all linear, right? So I kind of feel like there's this, did I do enough in order to claim that I belong to the dental community? Did I do enough that I can claim that I belong to the medical community? And what does enough mean? And what does that belonging mean? And I realized today that if someone chooses not to accept me into their life because they think I'm less than, that's information for me that I don't actually want to be around that person that's judging other people as less than as humans. So what I was afraid of when I was sharing my story is that people would think that I'm less valuable, less worthy, or not enough. That was all internal. And I find that my heart is so full and feels safe when I'm around people who are just accepting. I'm like, that's what I need to give myself, is like, Jillian, just accept yourself as you are. Because if you don't, you're going to continue to find people who don't accept you. You're going to abandon yourself in order to try to gain their approval rather than observe the people who are unconditionally accepting you and giving you love as you are right now.
100%. Yeah.
That was a very draining thing that happened today. It's just that
Okay.
self-dialogue was something I
Yeah.
had to observe today because I said something in a group. I gave a recommendation based off of my dental training, and it was to a group of physicians, and they said something that kind of felt like they didn't want to hear what I had to offer, right? And it was a suggestion. It was just saying uh how I would stepwise manage TMD, for example. And I interpreted their reply as like, oh, I don't belong here. They're trying to like say that your opinion is like, I purposely less worthy than, what they want to say. I'm like, they didn't say that at all. They just said what they're going to do for themselves with TMD because they didn't feel that they could be compliant with the conservative measurements that I had suggested. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, my brain drama was really, and the vulnerability was left a job on Friday, right? It's the grief. I'm in a vulnerable place because I have less belonging somewhere. I'm not as big of a mission. Like, I don't have this perceived mission that I am part of anymore. So I was vulnerable to this feeling of, let me see where else I don't belong and don't matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've been there when I left, when I quit. Yeah, it did bring up a lot of grief. I just spent days on the couch. I was so exhausted too. It was just like processing all these feelings. But then it felt so good to finally like just give that to myself. But it did feel, I was like, am I a bad person? And am I irresponsible? What am my family gonna think? And it was just that inner child. It's like really feeling vulnerable. I was just like, I didn't think I cried much until I hit this point where I got sober. So I started off in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then I found this 12-step group, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And this is where I was introduced to like really inner child work and inner child healing. And then that like opened the floodgates to all of this repressed grief. And it just started, I was like, oh, I cry all the time now.
Mm.
And now if I don't, I like something's wrong. If I haven't cried in like a week or two, I'm like, what's going on?
Mm.
I'm backed up.
I feel that work is really, really important. And the observation that I think the resistance is related to what pain might be felt, what things that you thought were true about your childhood might you examine from a different lens that was accepting that, oh, that was really painful. I had a therapy appointment and the therapist said, because you didn't get what you needed at that time. And I just bawled because that's not what I wanted to hear. Right. I wanted to hear that my childhood was amazing and that, oh, how dare
Mm,
society as adulthood, and my parents are amazing, but as a highly sensitive person who just had different needs at certain points, that it matters a lot for me to be able to express my emotions. And I felt very unable to process them out loud. And so I internalized to a detriment of my mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And so this new time in my life is sharing because I felt very restricted in my capacity to do that as a child.
wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Like that, I relate so much. I'm trying to find the perfect words, but it just really, yeah, you hit the nail on the head for me with that description. Like that's really how I felt as well. Highly sensitive and unable to really share my heart.
Mhm.
For whatever reason, there was too much stress in the household, and like that got shut down. I think that's the opening though, is coming out of the denial, that first like wave of grief when you go, oh, it wasn't what I thought it was.
Yeah. And that things could have been, I don't know if easier is the right word, but we could have been able to love ourselves sooner, right? I grieve that I hated myself for so long, thinking that I was the problem, something was wrong with me, when really it was that wasn't getting what I needed from my own self and from the environment, which was safety and support to process. I don't like the word manage emotions, but to honor them, to respect them, and to feel safe.
Yeah,
I find people pleasing comes out a lot when it's like, I don't feel safe, so I'm going to people please in order to reduce conflict.
right. And you might not have had parents who knew how to manage emotions, their own emotions well. So then how could they hold that space for
Yeah.
you?
And stating it as just an observation rather than a judgment, too. I don't think you stated it as a judgment. I'm just thinking from points in therapy, we're like, let's blame our parents. We're like, no, because our parents also had parents. Like, they also had a context. They also were doing the best they could. And maybe not tapping into their emotions was part of their survival mechanism. It's a different time. I'm sharing more how my brain is offering to cope with that, right? Just, oh, having
Yeah.
awareness. Oh, I didn't get what I need. That makes sense now why I feel the way I do. Now, what can I do going forward?
Well, that's a great point because I've gotten stuck in like the victim blame trap where it's been very hard to get out of that. Like I blamed my parents and because I felt so much anger.
Yeah. What's helpful for you?
But helpful for me now,
Mhm.
I mean, what you point to, like taking responsibility and then seeing things more like broadly, like intergenerationally, not focusing on them so much, but that this is like intergenerational.
Mm.
I mean, we can talk about all kind. I've confronted my parents. I really don't talk to them very much right now. Um, so I've tried a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then I think everyone's situation is different, unique, and people have to decide for themselves how they want to approach like their healing. But I've come to realize like my parents can't do it for me. And even if I got the ideal situation where they were able to hold that space and uh, there was amends making on both sides and mutual understanding, would it still really take care of like what's inside me still, my own pain? Like,
Mm.
I don't know. What do you think? What's
I feel this journey that you're on with your everyday spirituality and this quest and this seeking, it's probably a lifelong one, right?
right?
I do appreciate how you said there, even if we're not blaming our parents, it doesn't mean we're going to invite them full force back into our life in a way that, a lot of people, when they set boundaries with their family, there's a lot of judgment in that. I think it's important to understand what relationship is appropriate at what stage and place, and boundaries are often a way to keep people in our lives. And I've often just been very vulnerable to this belief in my mind that I'll go back and things will be different. I'll immediately get what I needed. right? Because I was able to vocalize what I needed now, right? Oh, it's this childlike wonder. I wonder if I can get it now that it's been communicated and this person has demonstrated growth. And then if I don't get it, it's this rewound. It's like this re-traumatization that I feel. And so now I have aligned my expectations with what I perceive the reality to be. And I am there for myself. I'll have my own back. I'm not going to set myself up to be disappointed because that's not actually even respecting that person. If I set myself up to be disappointed and I expect this person's going to disappoint me, then I'm going to probably look for ways they're disappointing me. If I come and I want to come to a place where I'm providing compassion for myself, compassion for the other people present, and observing where they're at in their life, and then awareness of how their present state of being is impacting what comes up in me, like that's curious, and I'm gonna make it a science experiment, right? I'm just not, we've been talking a lot about attaching to outcomes. I'm not going to have an outcome that needs to happen in order for a visit to be a success.
Right. Yeah, detachment's been that kept coming up for me as you were speaking, and it just sounds like you're giving yourself like space,
Yeah.
which is healthy. And I think that is detachment. And but having that subtle like expectation just puts they people feel that like they feel that pressure. It's like, oh, I'm being controlled. I don't get to be myself, which is that really loving if people aren't, they can't be who they are.
Yeah, I have a shirt that says, I think it says this, it might be a misquote, but it says something like this: empowering someone to be entirely themselves is the loudest way to love them. It's allowing people to just be, to show up authentically, to not mask and not hide, to not have shame in their lives that causes them to mold themselves in a way that accommodates to who you want them to be. Like just allowing themselves to be who they are is the loudest way to love
Right.
them.
And I think that the issue is though that the empathic person can get really caught up of allowing that person to be themselves, but then I'm going to like I'm not going to have a sense of self. I will just shrink down and be,
Yeah, I think that's the
yeah,
hardest
be
thing.
inauthentic or
Yeah, it's really hard. It feel for me when I left oral surgery in the military, I felt so empty inside. I to ask me who I am, and I think that's what's daunting about who are you? That question. Who are you, right? It's I say right, but I mean there's no right or wrong here. It's more daunting for me to respond to that question rather than what matters to you right now, like in this moment, what values are important. And if I say I am a person who, and I use my values in order to describe myself rather than my achievements, it's really helpful because it's a lot more stable than like, I'm a person who gets 100% on everything. And then I just got a 99 or a 98 or a, different score than that. And then that really is a shaking to my identity, which I shared with you is like, I still am having a problem detaching from that.
who are you? Yeah. Because it's like, I don't know if this relates to what you're saying, but letting the person, it's almost like a paradox, like letting them be who they are, meeting them where they're at, but not letting them be who they're really not. It's like, am I going to go along with people's games and manipulations, like knowing that's not who they really are, but then also at the same time meeting them at the level that they're at? Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really hard to know when people are using manipulation. It's like hiding insecurity. They're controlling, right? They're getting something out of it. Marketing does it in USA. Like I get so angry about emotional
Mhm.
manipulative marketing because I'm like, now I can see it because I kept feeling resentful that I kept falling for emotional manipulation. And now I can observe more of the patterns when people are using that to gain control over you. and just observing why one, I don't know exactly the role that emotional manipulation has in that person's life, but I feel like I can create this energetic boundary that sees it and kind of it's like a shield and kind of like reflects it back. You can keep that energy over on your side.
Right. Without like completely rejecting who they are, like
Mhm.
rejecting them as, oh, that's just where they're at and that's what they're capable of. That's what they're doing for right now. But I'm gonna
Yeah.
stay back.
Yeah, because the empath, right? We want to absorb and accept by allowing in. And I think that's the challenge is just what's my energy, what's theirs, like always keeping in mind, okay, what is my energy, what is theirs. Do you ever watch The Bubble Boy or know who I'm talking about?
I know the Seinfeld episode, but you're talking about a movie?
The Bubble Boy was immunocompromised, so he had to live in a bubble, to protect himself from
Hmm?
the world. I just imagine that energetic bubble when I go into places where I know some people come across with some emotional behaviors that feel unsafe to my system. Emotional manipulation or immature stomping and like trying to get me what they do, controlling things. I just, in order to make it through those environments without it completely sucking out my soul and all of my energy, I just imagine that I'm like in this
Yeah.
energy bubble. So it's an image that helps me. I was offering it in case it can be helpful for you or anyone listening who's also highly sensitive and needs, I find I was really restricting myself from going out in the world because it just felt exhausting all the time. I'm like, how can I protect my energy and still go into the spaces that I would like to be in without feeling
Yeah.
like really anxious about going because I know it's going to feel exhausting at times.
Right. And then how much of the exhaustion though is just not being detached? Because like say someone is emotionally manipulating, like just seeing like that's where they're at. That's
Mhm.
but am I like, do I have a whole story that's really painful about how this is happening to me? And that means I suck and I'm failing. I didn't set a proper boundary and I'm so attached the whole time. It's like I'm draining my own energy.
Yeah. Mm.
I think there's this, I don't know, there's like a balance of letting go of control. I've thought about it, like constantly being on like guard and vigilant about setting boundaries and like fixated on setting boundaries. Just actually, I feel like I'm getting more attached.
Hmm.
It's almost like boundaries come,
Hmm.
like, you know what I mean? Like creating space and being more detached, like actually allows boundaries like to kind of come up on their own.
Yeah. That was a fascinating. So because you're thinking about it so much, is that why you feel when you're thinking about it? Or can you explain a little bit more what you mean by when you try to set boundaries more, you become more attached?
Well, if I'm fixated on like I've got to set boundaries, I've got to do it right.
Mm.
And like my identity is somehow wrapped into that. I'm attached to it. Like I'm still attached. I'm almost getting more attached because they always like the I just hear and I think about it myself. Boundaries is the solution to people pleasing, like setting boundaries. But that's all like I don't know. That's something external, of course. But then there's internal boundaries too. Like I'm not going to let this. How much am I letting this affect my day? How much am I still thinking about this person who's, yeah, they're emotionally manipulative, but am I personalizing that? Is that about me or is that just their presentation right now?
Yeah. And
Because they don't know any better. That's how they're going about the world.
I was thinking about people pleasing too, is, I find boundaries is part of it, right? How you show yourself that your opinion and your needs matter, right? That's kind of okay. People pleasing is abandoning yourself often because you're catering to someone else's needs. But what is your need underneath that people pleasing, right? It could be the acceptance, it could be safety and conflict avoidance. So, like, what need is that boundary going to be fulfilling? And is it truly what's underneath all? Like, is that all from the people pleasing? Like, is that enough?
Yeah. And so it's like the boundary's fine. Like that's all it's all good. But then how much time am I spending in my head strategizing? versus what you're saying, going in and addressing that unmet need
Mhm.
and like relaxing a bit and just like spending some time like sending compassion or love, whatever it is, to that vulnerable part. About like there is, I have that too within me. It's such a resistance to doing this work.
Mhm.
And there's something about it. I think because of like feeling unsafe in childhood, it's like a pattern and natural to be in the head and thinking and strategizing and like ruminating. So like just the idea of dropping out of that, like
Mhm.
just being patient, like I'm just gonna listen. I'm gonna lay on my couch. I've got things to do, but I'm gonna drop everything and just like you would with an actual child, be like, we're gonna sit here until you feel better. Let's explore what's going on. Yes, your feelings are welcome. Tell me about them. Like to just do that, there's so much resistance. It's wild, but
Mhm. And a lot can come up at one time. I find pacing is important and hard to self pace, meaning bring up just enough to help you process through, but not so much that it's emotionally flooding and leads to avoidance because it's like, I opened that door and the floodgates came in and it was emotionally overwhelming. So I numb myself out. Part of my partnership with my therapist is to slow me down, right? From high achieving mindset of hustle. I want to heal as fast as possible. I want to like chew through all this as fast as possible and dive in. Let's like tone it down a notch because that was a pattern I was trying to do for myself. And it led to me isolating in my apartment in overwhelm most days. And like, so what would it take to get out into the world and to actually communicate with people who I'd like to get to know and to feel safe doing it? Well, it won't take getting over all of my trauma at one time. And so stepping it back to say, like, what's the goal for today? And how can we make that goal, like you were saying, meeting other people where they're at, meeting yourself where you're at, so you can set yourself up for success. Right. I'm not going to take the thing that makes me a 10 out of 10 hypervigilant person. I'm going to take the thing that makes me like 5 out of 10 discomfort. Enough anxiety, I've been avoiding it, but not so much anxiety that if I do it, I'm at high risk for like fight or flight and need to get out of that situation, which then would reinforce my avoidance.
yeah, that's a great point. And I'm an intense guy, and so I like intensity, and I definitely I get caught in that as well. Like, yeah, more is better. When really it's like bringing, can I bring gentleness into the whole equation? And have you heard of I don't know if you heard of Kyle Cease, but
I did. Yeah. Someone just
yeah,
recommended his book, The Illusion of Money.
okay. Yeah, he says, I've heard him say that it's like I'm not healing this just so it'll go away. Like that's not the intention. Like I need to get over this,
Hmm.
which I guess that's hard to do is to just like sit there and like I'm just with this.
Yeah. I think, again, going back to the detaching from the outcomes, right? If we
Yeah.
attach, if we're attached to the outcome as I am over this rather than the process of I'm sitting with this. And you made the point of like, how would life be different if we allowed ourselves to do that? And you said you'd be present.
Yeah. And then it gets more and more, it becomes more about the journey and like the excitement you get just from what's going to happen next. And I think I'm going through a process of like just learning trust, like trust in life, trust in the universe, like, but it's being patient because it's always slower than I want it to happen. I don't know if you can relate to that, but
Yeah, so I had a lot of urgency placed on me in the past 3 years where people's deadlines were very urgent to them. And I would do the task that they offered me. And then they would get to it maybe months to a year later. So it made me question, was their urgency real? Was this a true state of urgency? And at what cost did it take me? I spent, I had stayed up late. I skipped my weekends, you know, did something over, a holiday that was important for me in order to meet their deadlines. It was the ultimate slap in the face for them to not get back to that until months to a year later. And so now I examine other people's urgencies, and their urgencies are not your urgencies. So if they didn't prepare and then they, instigated some sort of urgency on you, well, that, you can choose to accept that urgency or not, depending on how urgent it feels to you. But with my experience with my illness becoming life threatening, I've realized that I didn't put enough urgency on living. I still didn't, right? Like years after I faced those experiences, it was such a learned behavior to still attach my worth to my outcomes that I didn't have enough tools, enough self trust, as you've mentioned. It would have been overwhelming for me to stop and ask myself, what do I need in these moments? So I distracted myself by jumping into what I already knew, which was the overwork. Which brings me where I'm at today was this word of urgency. And my urgency, one is to get my messages out in case I die that I think are important, but it's accepting that I will die at some point, and whatever people think that means for them. You and I briefly communicated about death and that everyone loves to talk about it, but you had a recent video on your channel about, like, if we examine our death and accept our mortality, right, it can help us to inform how we live better and to be intentional about living. And it was a lesson that I had gained from my experience, but I hadn't accepted and implemented. So I still wasn't, it didn't feel authentic to me when I was still responding to these people's urgencies, because that was that learned behavior, that people pleasing. So when I left my institution on Friday, I felt parts of myself dying because the institution represents everything that I thought I was before, meaning the need for this high ranking academic success, right? You're just climbing that ladder, you're getting the titles, you're publishing a whole bunch of stuff, right? You're being recognized for your work. The ego driven part of my life was attached to that institution. I valued the mission of the institution and I loved everything it taught me and the experience. And also the part of where I'm at today is that child, right? It feels like when I'm talking to you, it's just that child, like, come on, let's go play now. Give yourself opportunity to have fun, to let loose, to be free, to frolic in the fields. And it's expansile, where I felt so restricted in the construct of the way that our education system is. And so my urgency now feels like, okay, your life here is limited, whatever that means for all of us. And how can you be intentional about living and not so fearful about dying that you don't live?
Yeah, I think the balance. But I think, yeah, intentional, that word really stands out. How can I be intentional with what I'm doing? And urgency to me is a red flag so often. It's like I'm avoiding something, probably my feelings.
Mm.
I try to ask myself, like, why is this so urgent right now? What am I avoiding?
Hmm. That resonates a lot, Shane. That resonates a lot. Oh my gosh, what am I avoiding right now? And even when we have senses of urgencies, right? I do mindfulness Mondays and I've missed the last two. I'm like, oh my goodness. I like literally thought about it. I'm like, man, judging myself for not holding myself accountable, but I just felt it would have been forced. I was grieving so much. I don't want to appear forced, but I felt the night before a sense of urgency to put out a video for Mindfulness Mondays. People were counting on me, right? The two that maybe watch the day that I submit. And I just had to check in with myself. Like, you are creating this construct in your head. You are making this mean something. This sense of urgency as to what not disappoint, to stay accountable. to avoid that feeling of like, I felt like I was disappointing myself for not being accountable. But what I could have looked at is, you know what, but I'm tending to what I need more right now, which was, I was just experiencing so much grief that I just was so energetically exhausted. Those Mondays got skipped, and I'm sure people could watch my last mindfulness Mondays, or they could search on YouTube for a different mindfulness, exercise. And it was just so much mind drama.
Yeah, I relate.
This was a lovely discussion.
Yeah.
When you think about reflecting back on some of the things we said, what do you want to make sure to highlight? I know people's takeaways will all be different, but what is your takeaway from our time together?
My takeaway, just to be present. And there were so many times where I was like in my head thinking like, oh, should the conversation go this way or that way, or do I go back to that point? It's like letting that go. So something, whatever wants to come through will come through.
I'm
It's,
wondering if there is anything that wanted to come through that I didn't provide the space.
I think this was perfect. And if there's more to come through, it'll come through. We'll do another one of these.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
think
would.
it was exactly what it needed to be. It wasn't what I expected. It's probably not what you expected because, and that's a good thing because it was organic.
Yeah, I loved it. We both came in with no attachment to any outcome, which allowed it to be what it was. I'm assuming because we either came in and let go of the attachment to the outcome.
Yeah, I was thinking more like that, or
Yeah.
that probably for me. But
My expectations to make sure you had a really good time. This is the best hosting experience ever, and it's gonna go viral. No, I'm just kidding you. I'm totally kidding you. My expectation was just to enjoy your presence here, to learn more about you, to really appreciate everything that you've been working on and sharing with your community. To, of course, invite them. If may you please tell them where is your community to invite the audience to learn more.
yeah, I'm on YouTube. So the handle is at Shane Fuller, ShaneFuller, then 333. And then I have a website too, shaneafuller.com. So you can
Yeah.
find me on there. I post videos. And I do one-on-one coaching. So if you want to book a free consultation, you can just go on to my website, and then there's a link there to schedule.
Well, I know this is the first discussion for many more to come. I'm so grateful that you took the time and that we got another opportunity as a bonus opportunity here to get to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing and interviewing people. And that's a skill.
Thank you so much for joining us in the discussion. Make sure to say hi, drop your reflections and your questions down in the comments below. We love to hear from you. If this channel resonates, please make sure to subscribe and head on over to Shane's channel. He's got amazing content as he shares what he's learning along his own healing journey to help others on their journey as well. Until next time, thanks for being here.